Good afternoon, ladies and gents, and welcome to our live webinar, The 5 Best Practices of Service Recovery, the Science of Service Recovery for CX Professionals. We're really pleased to have you online with us. Thank you. We appreciate you. Thank you for being here with us. My name is Anthony, and I'm hoping you can see my PowerPoint deck. Yes, my name is Anthony. I head up product marketing at inQuba, and I am joined by Trent, our Managing Director. Trent, you want to say hi?
Thanks, Anthony, and thank you to all those people attending today. We're very excited about sharing how the inQuba platform and approaches can really lead to a far better customer experience. I think harsh reality is that service failure will happen. That's inevitable. What's not inevitable is that you have to leave it in that state. And we're going to be sharing some really great ideas with you today in terms of how we can take those service failures and turn them into absolute delight.
That's great. Thanks, Trent. A couple things that I just want to tell you about, some housekeeping. So the agenda for today, I'm going to be taking you through a presentation, the 5 best practices of service recovery. We're then going to pause for a quick poll. I want your views on something as attendees. It's important to note that we are going, from there we're actually going to go into a product demo. So Trent, I'm going to hand over to Trent, who's going to give us a solution demo, which will speak to some of the things that I've spoken through. And then towards the end, we're going to have an opportunity for a Q&A. So if you have any questions during the course of the webinar, you'll see that in your webinar widget, there is a little questions section. Please feel free to put some questions in there. We're going to try quite hard to address those towards the end. And as you would have seen from the invite, we're also going to try quite hard to do this in about 45 minutes, but let's see how we go. Okay, great. And you may be here because of the promise of this particular paper. We have this paper for you called the 5 Best Practices of Service Recovery. Today's webinar is really a summary of this paper, so there's a lot more detail in this, and I'm going to be giving you some information shortly on how you can access that. Great. So with the housekeeping aside, I think let's move forward. I'm going to talk a little bit about the service recovery paradox, and maybe this is best explained by a little story. So let's talk about our business traveler. Let's call her Sophie. Her name is Sophie, and she gets informed the day before her flight that her flight has been cancelled. She gets informed by automated text message, and just before she picks up the phone to make an angry call to the airline, she's actually contacted by one of the consultants. The consultant has a brief discussion with her and offers her a flight on exactly the same day that her flight was, her original flight was planned for, as well as an airport shuttle at her destination point. So what's important about this is that there's, at a high level, this is pretty much what happened, but there was a lot going on behind the scenes as well. There was a reason why the particular consultant may have been assigned to this case. There may have, and in fact, there were reasons why this customer, this traveler, was offered what she was offered in this particular case. And I will speak a little bit more about that towards the end of the presentation. But the other thing that happened here was that actually Sophie's satisfaction as a customer, or even her loyalty, increased to a level that was actually higher than what it was prior to the service failure, which sounds strange, but it really is a thing, and this is what is something that is called the service recovery paradox. It might be best explained through this chart. So if we look at this chart where customer loyalty is mapped against time, the blue graph, the blue dashed graph, curve, sorry, the S curve, represents the customer without service failure. There's a slight increase in the middle there, but then the service failure is represented by the red line. And you can see it dips suddenly where there is a service failure, and then service recovery actually makes it increase to a level that is reasonably higher than what it would have been had there not been service recovery. So this actually makes it quite an interesting scenario, because we're kind of saying that, so, and this is based on a study, by the way, the source is there at the bottom. What we're saying is that service failure is actually an opportunity to increase customers' loyalty or satisfaction. So while we see them as big and nasty, they're actually also really positive in terms of, if they are used correctly, they really can boost customer loyalty and customer satisfaction. So it does kind of then plead the question of, but surely not all service recovery is equal. Surely there's good service recovery and bad service recovery. And this is one of the reasons why we want to talk about the best practices of service recovery today, so that you have an opportunity to know how best to service your customers when things go wrong, because they will inevitably go wrong. What are the things that we need to do or to implement in order to make sure that we are ending up with a net positive from a customer loyalty perspective and actually improving customer loyalty. And that's what I'm going to get into, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But before we do that, just a very brief introduction, because some of you may not know exactly who we are. So inQuba, our head office is based in Sandton in Johannesburg. We have offices in Australia as well as North America, and some presence in the UK. Here's a quick view of our customer list at the moment. You can see that we play quite hard in the financial services and insurance space, FSI. But we're also quite busy in telecoms and ICT, hospitality and lifestyle, as well as retail. Happily, we have enjoyed some recognition recently, specifically from Forrester and Gartner, with regards to some of their reports. And most recently, actually, which is November 2018, in this particular report called the Gartner Market Guide for Voice of the Customer Solutions, we were one of only 2 solution providers globally that enjoyed top ratings in 3 out of 4 categories, according to Gartner. Right, so getting back into 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, the best practices of service recovery. At a very high level, what are these things? So capture everything. Your customer is talking to you all the time through formal and informal channels. It's important that that voice of the customer is captured and organized. Exploring context. Every one of your individual customers, like Sophie, is coming with particular context and particular baggage, to use the flight metaphor again, in terms of past interactions and sentiment trend. And we need to deal with people contextually and differently so that we're able to help them in their individual situations. Driving recovery. So this is the collaborative action which is required by the team in order to ensure that there is actually resolution, and it needs to encourage resolution. Being human. So humans want to be dealt with by humans. They require a human touch, and they need to be assured that they've actually been understood. And then efficiency. It's important for your team that your team have approaches and methodologies and tools even, which are going to help them in doing what they need to do, especially for large businesses where you have a large volume of cases or a feedback hitting the business at any point in time. The more you can empower your team through efficiency tools, the more the customers are actually going to benefit, and loyalty is going to receive a happy little bump. All right, so we're going to get straight into number 1, capturing everything. Your customers are providing feedback all the time through a number of channels. These channels are formal and informal, and we need to capture and we need to share the voice of the customer. So organizing and sharing, irrespective of the channel, the feedback that is coming in through surveys, through phone calls, whatever those things are, need to be captured in preferably in one place, and then shared throughout the business, not giving everything to everyone, but giving slices of the feedback to the right departments within the business so that people can actually action it based on their areas of responsibility. Once you're actually pulling all this feedback in, then you will no doubt note that some of the feedback, the importance of that feedback needs to be elevated to something that requires attention, something that requires people to actually do jobs in order to resolve something. This is where we create cases. A case is basically a ticket which has a person assigned to it and has an SLA period. But what we want to be doing, especially with large volumes, is we want to be creating these tickets or these cases systematically through rules. So what are some of the things that rules could be looking at? So here are a few examples. Rules could be looking at feedback, so the results of quantitative and qualitative feedback. Let's imagine that a rule that says any NPS rating that we receive that is a rating of 7 or less, or something like that, results in a case being created and assigned to a particular person within the business. So that would be based on feedback. Themes and sentiments. So text analytics gives us the ability to see how people feel and what the themes are that they're talking about, or what the categories are. And we can set up rules to say any mention of the following theme or the following category, let's create a case systematically and assign it to that team Engagement. So your customers are receiving marketing engagements all the time. Activity or inactivity on those engagements could be important enough to trigger a case. Let's look at a few more. So 4 and 5 over here, customer journey. So we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about customer journey management, but your customers are navigating your touch points or your channels all the time. They're going from branch to website to mobile app. And there may be sequences that are very important to the business. So for instance, you may see from your data that a customer is actually having to call the call center 3 times in a row in order to progress and work towards the goal. You could set up a rule, hopefully, which then allows you to say, well, whenever that scenario actually happens, let's create a case, assign it to someone within the business, and make sure that someone reaches out and helps that customer because they're obviously stuck in a loop and they need some assistance. And then third-party solutions. Your call center application, as an example, may serve as something that can trigger cases, and it's the kind of thing that you would want to do integrations into a case management system so that we can use that to inform service recovery. So we've spoken about creating cases systematically, but obviously, we're not in a world yet where everything is digital. We need to be able to create cases manually as well. We have customers that receive faxes still, as an example. Or the phone rings and someone is complaining about something. You need a mechanism to be able to capture this so that it lives with all the other cases and it can be basically captured and assigned within the business. Right, that is number 1, capturing everything. Now that we've captured everything, before we reach out to the customer, we actually need to understand their context because their context is important. We have now created a case, which means the importance of this thing has been elevated. We want to give it to an appropriate team, but context is king. And this is because every customer has their own unique situation that they are arriving with when they contact us. So what are some of the things that we would expect to be able to find when we look at a customer's context? So here are a couple of ideas. A single view of every customer. This basically means that every one of your customers should have an entity within your CX platform, which is growing dynamically and continuously as you learn more and more things about the customer. So as they reach out to us with a new email address, or as they engage with one of the marketing communications, we're able to grow this single view of the customer. Understanding case history, number 2. Equally important because now we're dealing with a case for this customer and they could have had cases in the past. In fact, they could have cases which have not yet been resolved. So it's very important that we understand this trend that led us to where the customer is today so that we can deal with them appropriately. Touchpoint activity. So what are our channels or touch points that the customer has been interacting with? Have they been going to branches? Have they been calling the call centers? And this longitudinal view or their journey is obviously very important. Sentiment and themes. How does the customer feel and what do they feel these things about? This is important because they have probably given us lots of verbatim or open-ended, unstructured feedback in the past through surveys, through tweets on the social web, whatever the case may be. And we have been able to text analyze. We should have been able to text analyze all this commentary so that we can figure out exactly how they feel about certain things. We might see that some customers are always talking about the queue length or the on-hold time, or they're always talking about convenience or effort or that type of thing. This is important color, which is going to help us when we interact with customers. All right, let's look at a few more things. We'd like to suggest here that if you have a customer entity within your platform, it's important that it's available anywhere. Wherever the customer's unique ID pops up within your platform, you need to practically be able to hyperlink and draw up the customer's unique profile from anywhere within your system so that different people in the business can access that information. Over a period of time, you may have found that documents may have been exchanged between the business and the customer, and it's important that those documents are housed in a single place, but also kept within the context of the individual cases. So if there is a case that is requiring documents to be exchanged or shared back and forth, they actually need to be accessible within the context of those cases so that it is understandable and so that it can be drawn upon at a later stage. And what happens if we need additional information? Well, we reach out to the customer. So this is often a phone call or it's an email, but we suggest that it's actually useful to have a mechanism within your platform, within your CX platform, which allows you to reach out to a customer on a one-on-one basis and just collect additional information. that thread, that communication thread between the business and the customer then exists within the context of the case into the future as important context for the next person who needs to draw up the customer's context. Let's move on to number 3. So number 3 is driving recovery. Now that we have collected feedback and we have explored the context, now we actually need to solve the problem. So we talk about 2 different roles. We talk about owners and we talk about assignees. Owners drive the collaborative resolution of cases through assignees. And assignees are the people who, it could be individuals or it could be teams, who are actually doing the work that is required in order to resolve the customer's issue. They have SLA periods. What this differentiation does is we manage to avoid cases being passed around indiscriminately because the owner is paying attention to that. And when they don't actually meet their SLA or there's not sufficient activity, what happens is it actually escalates, and it would escalate to a supervisor. The supervisor would then essentially be added as a participant on the particular case, and it would probably get some additional focus. And then what's obviously important is understanding failure and recovery. Understanding failure in terms of the hotspots within your business, why things are going wrong, that's an obvious one, but you also want to see what the recovery process looks like. So we would typically suggest the following kinds of analytics views, things like root cause analysis. So what are the reasons for service failure within the business? What are the hotspots by division, by channel, by product perhaps? Recovery and escalation time. So which of my teams are recovering within good time, and which ones are experiencing escalations more frequently than others? And then a backlog management. What's the queue looking like at any point in time? Are we resourced sufficiently in order to deal with the volume that we have before us? Right. Let's look at number 4, the human touch. So customers need to be assured that they have been understood, and the business needs tools and approaches in order to make sure that they're able to deliver empathy at scale. That's something we talk about quite a lot, is that we're able to deliver empathy at scale as long as we have customer context and we have a smart enough platform and mechanisms that can actually draw upon that context. So keeping customers updated. Your customers are going to want a one-on-one interaction, and that's pretty straightforward. They're going to be dealing with an individual, but they also often are wanting systematic updates. So in other words, automatic notifications which inform them that something is progressing, that there has been some movement, and we are moving towards resolution. Leverage the context, bottom left. So I've spoken a little bit about a single view of the customer. That single view of the customer needs to be available within your platform in order to systematically personalize any engagements that go out. And this speaks quite nicely to the next point. You might be in a large organization with multiple brands. There might be a brand hierarchy with a main brand and sub-brands. So if I were to draw on an example, I would think of Edcon having sub-brands such as Red Square, CNA, and so on. But you want to speak to the customers in the voice that is familiar to them. So as let's say I am a Truworths customer, but I shop at Daniel Hechter, I would want to see communications that are engaging me from the viewpoint of Daniel Hechter, not from ID necessarily or some unknown entity, as far as my case is concerned. And then gathering feedback. So we have fixed this thing, we have recovered. Now what do? Well, we actually want to know post-recovery, were we successful? We can reach out to the customer with a quick survey, can find out how it went. Has the perception changed? We believe that we have recovered, but does the customer believe the same thing? And it's quite a good idea to always reach out at that point. So let's just quickly look at number 5, which talks, these are just a couple of suggestions from our side. Because large enterprises deal with large volumes all the time, but we're wanting to drive resolution and customer satisfaction. So the people, the participants, the assignees and the owners really need tools and processes at their fingertips that are going to help them to do this fast and to do it efficiently. So what does this look like? So first of all, everyone involved, participants, need to understand their responsibilities. They need to have dashboards that clearly indicate what is their responsibility and what isn't. In fact, they should really only be seeing things that are their own responsibility, with very quick filters that help them to manage their time to sort different cases from each other. User-defined view. So as a participant, I would want to customize my view to show me exactly, imagine I've got views that I need to return to quite often because of a certain set of filters and that type of thing. I want to return to that. I want to define my own views. I want to be able to tag and autofill, so I might want to return to some cases at a later stage. I might want to autofill the content of some cases, especially in scenarios where I have recurring scenarios and I want to actually just use the same information and then customize it or personalize it slightly with a little bit of copy. I would really appreciate something like an autofill capability. And then business specific fields. So your business has fields and metrics that are important to it and aren't important to other businesses. We want you to be able to define those, capture them on a case level, and then be able to report on those things. It might be things like TCF, it might be business specific categorization, or anything like that. It's very important to your business. Right, so let's return to Sophie. So what would an effective service recovery scenario look like? So you'll remember I introduced this in the beginning. Sophie is a business traveler. She had a flight for the following day. She received an automated SMS which told her that her flight had been cancelled. And what happened in the background was that a ticket was created, or a case was created, which was then assigned to a particular consultant at the airline. So there was some intelligence that sat behind this. We knew from profile that Sophie was in fact a business traveler. It was then given to a very particular team who dealt with the business travelers. And what this consultant did was he drew upon the single view of the customer. He looked at Sophie's background. He was able to confirm at this point that she was in fact a business traveler, because he could see that she was always flying for traveling for 24 hours, flying down in the evening, returning 24 hours later, presumably for a meeting. And it was always very quick. So based on this information and some other information, I mean, that was her historical information. He also looked at her sentiment and things that she had said in the past, themes and categories of things that she had said, and saw that issues like convenience and timeliness and effort were very important to her. And this is what allowed him to make a very particular offer of the ticket on exactly the same day, because he now knew that she had a meeting for that day, presumably had a meeting, as well as an airport shuttle to make sure that there was convenience at the point at which she got there. Now, not every customer was offered the same thing, but they were able to offer her this with her context being available and understanding what it was that she was probably needing. And obviously she appreciated that. What we would then do after recovery is we would reach out to her with a quick survey saying, do you believe that we actually resolve this at a satisfactory level? Is there any suggestions that you would make? And all her results would then would be aggregated and would be available within online dashboards for the business to see exactly how the service recovery mechanism is working, where it is being successful and where it is not. So that is just a quick, and I mean, I do think this is a relatively simplistic scenario, but this is an effective service recovery scenario, as you can see, being fed by a lot of intelligence and a lot of rules. What we're going to do now is we are going to move into a quick poll. If you'll bear with me for a second, I'm just going to draw up the poll quickly. And I would love you guys to participate in this particular poll. I'm hoping that you can see it before your very eyes at the moment. The questions are, well, first of all, the question is, which of the following is the largest barrier to excellent service recovery in your organization? Number one is organizational indifference. Please be honest in this case. Number two is insufficient voice of the customer. In other words, we're actually just not listening. We are not getting the feedback that we should be getting. Number three is overly complex customer experiences. Number four is difficulty unifying customer information. And number five is difficult systems and methods. I'm going to give you guys a minute. If you could please participate in this poll, and then I will tell you what everyone said. Okay, great. Thank you, guys. 3/4 of you have responded to this. Let me tell you what the results are quickly. 15% of you said organizational indifference. 1/4 of you said insufficient voice of the customer. 15% of you said overly complex customer experiences, as well as 15% difficulty unifying customer information. And our biggest group practically a third of you said difficult systems and methods. I'm closing the poll, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over to Trent.
Thanks very much, Anthony, and thanks for the introduction, overview of the best practices and obviously the stories in terms of Sophie and how we can deal with those airline examples. So I'm going to pick up with what Anthony spoke about, talking about the customer experience. And I'm going to be using the same 5 steps to actually talk about the approach to servicing. So capture everything, explore context, drive recovery, be human, and ensure efficiency. But I'm going to be doing that by virtue of interactions with the actual platform. Before I do that, I'm just going to quickly position a little bit of the inQuba platform. So, in fact, offer 2 solutions. We've got our inQuba case management solution, and then we've got a significantly enhanced solution called inQuba Case Management Pro. So if we go through the list, and I'm going to be showing you each one of these as we go through the demo, is both solutions offer manual and automatic case creation across omni-channels. Both allow for the auto-assignment of cases to people or teams with case owner oversight. I think the owner oversight is quite an important differentiator that we'll take you through. We support SLAs and escalations. We have role-based dashboards to show you progress. We can sort and filter the different cases in the platform itself. We can always link through and click through to the original source of context. It's quite an important concept in the inQuba solution. And then we've got the single view that Anthony spoke about at length. We've got some really nice capabilities in terms of templates to be able to communicate, and there's very rich insights. Then we move on to some of the key differentiators in terms of Case Management Pro. So there's certain capabilities that we offer in our upscale solution. The first of those is to link different brands. This is ideal in an environment, for instance, when you've got a multi-brand environment, you have a single and central customer recovery environment. Associated with that is obviously templates that allow for the brand to be both identified and then managed and communicated to. Then we've got the ability to have custom case fields, so we can actually extend the standard fields in the platform itself. We've also got the ability to put in TCF, or treating customers fairly, categorization capability. We've got the ability to have user-defined views. We've also got some very nice functionality I'll show you with the auto-filling. And lastly, we've got quite a sophisticated capability that builds off our engage capability to actually send out notifications to keep customers informed as we go. So I'm going to run through each one of those and just show you a little bit of how the platform delivers on each one of those fronts. So let's start off with talking about capturing everything. So as Anthony said, we really want to be able to capture information from a variety of different sources. I'll swap over to my browser window, and this typically is the view that an individual, an agent that's working in the platform would see. Now, let's ignore for a second the menu items on the left, because as a super user, I can access everything in the system. But really what we want to emphasize here is that we first of all can look at our different categories, our new cases, our signed cases, our closed cases. We can look at those that are complaints, compliments and queries. And then we have an escalation mechanism that keeps track of what's going to escalate using our SLAs. We've also got a bookmark capability over here that allows us to actually highlight a case. Very useful agents from a productivity point of view. So I'm going to go quickly into that. So I'm just going to call some of the bookmark cases that are useful to share a little bit of what we're doing. And straight away, we're going to start drilling down and see that there's some cases related to Charlotte Weaver. And just as a precursor, before we actually talk about how we set this up, I'm just going to go into a case. You can see Charlotte. We can see some of her information. We get some information, a little bit of what's happening with the actual case that's been assigned. We can see who the owner is, and we can see who the assignee is obviously it's quite some time because we've been using this in our demo environment, and we can manage then notes against it. So this is really the construct that we're working towards in terms of being able to get information flowing to the right place. So that's what we want to aim to do. The question obviously then is, well, how do we go about doing that? And the first thing I want to really drill into is a little bit of the automation capabilities of our platform. So we support two concepts. The first concept is the ability to define rule sets. Basically, what will give rise to an escalation. And the first one I'm going to go into here actually uses some of our text analytics capability. So we're actually seeing any email that's coming in and that's positive, that's sent to feedback@ta.incubacx.com, TA being transatlantic, that's our demo environment. This is to produce a list item, and the list item promotes to a case. What's the difference between a case and a list? A list is simply an item like a server, an email, or a Facebook item. And a case means that it gets assigned a responsibility and actually has to be managed. So that's how we set up rules. Very easy to actually just set them up. Whole host of different capabilities in this regard, and we can add to those very quickly. We can type in the definitions all through the user interface, so very easy to use. Then what we need to do is, once we've actually defined a particular item, we need to get to the next point, which is we need to obviously assign an individual that's responsible for it. So we take the rule that we've just assigned, which is our positive email text, and now we start to assign an owner. So the owner in this case is Janet Jones. The participants, in fact, is a team. So a team is a group of individuals. So the list owner is going to be Janet, and she will ultimately be responsible, but there might be quite a number of people that are actually part of that process. And the inQuba platform is quite strong in this regard, so you can actually define your users. That's directly in the interface itself. But we also support the idea of teams, and we can group people together in a team. So we know in our demo system that we've got our CX team, and we can define all the participants in that. We do incidentally work with the Active Directory, so all of this information can be populated and managed from an Active Directory integration. That's something we do quite seamlessly using the Azure Active Directory. So that's one way that we can get items to actually go into a list. So let me just quickly go into a list. I'm going to go into, for instance, let's have go into a list, for instance, poor NPS. I know some of this data is a little bit old, so just going to go back in time, and we can see all of the items that potentially met the criteria of having a poor NPS. And all of that information is available there. I can go into the actual survey itself, and I can see the responses, and I can see a text comment over there. So that's a list item. But you will recall that we actually spoke about the fact that we have cases. So I'm going to go back to my cases dashboard, and a list item can become a case item. I'm going to go back to where I started, and let's go back over here to Charlotte, and let's look at the actual survey that gave rise to this particular scenario. So that in this particular case, we're going to look at a survey that is far longer, and this survey actually arose because of the fact that this person was asked the question, how likely are you to recommend transatlantic to family and friends? And she said 1. So that's a terrible score. We know all of the context of the individual through the event data, and we can see over here that she's answered quite a number of questions, and she's quite frustrated because obviously transatlantic hasn't got back to Charlotte to actually resolve the issue. So that's the survey. And then the case associated with that actual survey is all kept together and grouped very nicely. So we can access that directly from the same panel. And here we can see the details of Charlotte that's been copied from the survey from the event data. And here you can start to see the notes that are captured and kept against that particular individual. But in the same environment, what I can see is that there's a Facebook item that's come into play. And this item has actually been escalated. There's a comment, actually this particular item came from Anthony, and he got some comments around a terrible product range. So we can reach all of those different items using our rules, whether it's coming from Facebook or whether it's coming from email, whether it's coming from surveys, into our case management solution. So it gives you a quick sense of how we capture different things into one environment. The last thing, in fact, I'm going to show you is something that's completely unique to inQuba, and that is the ability to look at people that have followed certain paths and route those into a case management environment. So here we've got a pretty simple scenario. Customers going from transaction B, transaction C, and to D. And we can select a customer path. So we're just going to select this quite simple path here to transaction F. And what we can do is we can again create a list. And again, in the same way that we defined list rules based on sentiment or answers to surveys, we can route all of that information. So very simple to use through the same interface. All right, so now that we've actually created an item, and we know in this particular case that we start to have some context for Charlotte, let's go to understand a little bit more of what's happening in Charlotte's world, and we're going to start drilling down on some of the information. So we go back to this particular case over here, and what I can do is we actually link to a single view of customer. So we can drill into our view of Charlotte, and we can quickly get a view that Charlotte is a 32-year-old. She's on Facebook and on Twitter. We can see her email address. We can see she's been quite active because she's had 14 interactions from a CX point of view, but there's a lot of transactions and activity over there. What we're going to do is we're going to drill in and get a little bit more information in terms of what's happening in Charlotte's world. And that takes us straight away to our single view of customer. So a couple of things that the system enables. So all of the information that was captured at the time that the case was created, or that the server gave rise to, is over here. And you can see that we can add and manage attributes. Obviously, this is our Case Management Pro capability. If we have multiple profiles of Charlotte, we link those together through our single view capability. And let's start off by understanding a little bit more of the context of Charlotte. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our text analytics capability, and we're going to look at Charlotte as a customer in this particular context. So we can see over here our customer experience model. We can see she's talking about the brand. She's talking about a couple of things related to claims. And in fact, we can even look at comments that are specific to the customer. So let's start there. And we can see straight away that we've actually flagged this customer at risk. And the reason is that she made a comment. She said, "Hi, your company lacks professionalism. The claim process was," and let's just drill down a little bit onto that detail. We can go and see exactly what gave rise to the fact that Charlotte has been labeled as a high-risk individual. And we can see the context of it. So it's a little bit of what I spoke about earlier in terms of always linking information together. So there we can see the information. Claims process was extremely slow, seriously thinking of leaving. And I can, in fact, now have a conversation with Charlotte, and I can chat to her. We know this came from an email source. I know that from the icon over there. And I've got some pre-branded communications that will allow me to engage with Charlotte in a way that reinforces our positive engagement with Charlotte. So that's our text analytics. We can get a more complete view of Charlotte, a little bit of her experiences over time. So we can, for argument's sake, start to look at what she said around, for instance, claims. So let's go and have a look at the comments from claims. She's still waiting to be updated. She made some comments about the assessor. So you get a strong sense that she's had some problems with claims and communication. We can get into that detail. What we can also do is we can see all of the interactions that Charlotte's had over time. So you can see Charlotte's a very active customer. She sent in a couple of emails over here. We've had a case that we've got created. Well, we know that because that was our entry point. We've also sent out a couple of communications. And in fact, she completed another survey when she was purchasing the product some time back, and we could actually drill down into the detail associated with that. What we can also do if we're making use of inQuba's journey management capability is we can actually ingest information from other systems to see what kind of transactions we've received from Charlotte over a period of time. So we can see that she's asked for confirmation of covers. We can see that She's been doing some research over time. See that she's got a quote. So it gives you lots of rich information in terms of understanding the context of Charlotte. And then just another avenue to be able to talk to Charlotte. She's actually got quite a number of conversations that are going on over here. And we can, again, chat directly to Charlotte. And any of these conversations that we have with her, we're able to actually look at those directly in one place. So that gives you a sense of all of the things going on in Charlotte's world. And remember that we got to that all linked through entry through the actual case itself. So hopefully you can see that we really integrate, pull together a complete context for Charlotte. So back to our roadmap, and let's move on to driving recovery. So coming back to our scenario over here, we've got our case details. Obviously, we can chat to Charlotte, and when we actually finish, we can complete that particular item, and that'll close off the item. Now, what is sitting in the background of the system is that it has some very strong SLAs. And what we'll actually do based on the hierarchy structure associated with the owner is it'll escalate to the owner, in this particular case, after 8 hours. It'll send a reminder at 6 hours, and it'll send off email reminders that we can specify the hours that are relevant in that particular scenario. As we close the case, it'll change the status of that particular case, and it'll move it out of being an open case. I'm not going to actually do that here because it'll remove it from this particular point of view, and it'll move it into a closed case. And then what we've got is we've got a whole host of reporting capabilities to be able to do it, to be able to keep track of what's going on. Let me show you a little bit of how we do this in the social media space. So let's go into an item and see how we got some feedback from the social media space, and see how we can interact with customers. I think maybe let's start off with a view on Twitter. It's going to find some Twitter items. You can see these are our different lists that make up our feedback, and we're going to just see what mentions have been made of transatlantic over a period of time. And we can see all of the different items coming in, and you can see a whole conversation actually going on. And as we are interacting with the particular individual, those are happening in the inQuba platform, but they've been reflected in Twitter directly itself. It shows you how we work and resolve across multiple platforms. The next point, obviously, is that we want to be human. So I have focused already on showing you how we chat and we reply. I'm going to take that a step further and actually take you to a situation of how we can actually manage the process of putting templates together. So what the inQuba platform allows for is that we can actually define templates. In our terms, we call those engagements, to be able to interact with a customer. And what we're going to do is, in fact, I'm just going to go to a slightly different point in the platform over here, go into our template library, and we can actually define our talk templates. And let's go and have a look at this particular template over here. And we can actually put together headers and footers of different scenarios. And these templates are then used and make sure that the brand is reinforced when we reply. And we can populate those with defined test data, which means that we get standardized responses coming back into the customer themselves. But all of that is managed and defined within the inQuba platform. What we can also do is we can take this to a much higher level of sophistication. And in fact, we can define engagement rules. So the engagement rules really define when communications are sent automatically by the platform. So there's a simple example over here, and we're going to show you a scenario when a communication is sent out when a case is actually closed. So very simple scenario is when the item is closed, we're going to send a case engagement and what we've done is we defined the rule as when the status is close. So let's add to that. We can take a different scenario. We've got a very rich source of different conditions that we can use. We can say, for instance, when an item is of a certain priority, we can then add different elements, or for argument's sake, if the TCF category meets a certain criteria, for instance, TCF criteria 1, you can send a different kind of communication. So it's very sophisticated in terms of the rules that you can actually build up and bring into play, and each of those can be actually triggered based on what's happening on the case. So the agent themselves doesn't actually have to do anything. The analyst that actually sets up the platform actually defines all of these in advance, and then defines exactly the templates that go out. The templates themselves, we've got quite a strong and rich capability over there. So we can actually edit these templates. We can define automatic mail merges that happen against them. So all of the information associated with the case can then be merged into a template. So very simple template over here, dear first name, and then we can get into the personalization. And any of those attributes, for instance, we've got an attribute that's sitting in the case itself, we can very easily take that attribute, just do a drag and drop, and populate it in. So now the end customer will get a communication that says, Dear Sophie or Dear Charlotte. We can define, for instance, who the agent is. In our terms, that's the owner, and we can merge that information and actually trigger that off to the individual itself. So high degrees of automation associated with the inQuba platform. The next thing that I'd like to show you is that we've got some really nice functionality for people that are doing high volume processing. And what we're going to show you over here is just a simple example of basically when you're getting to the point of populating different scenarios, is we can then record a macro to define different elements. So for instance, we can have a button that set the case title, set the incident type to complaint, set the contact reference to email, set the desired outcome to a defined outcome. And this then gets recorded as a particular item. Quite nice in terms of looking at exactly how each of the fields populates. We've got some really nice functionality. So for instance, if you mouse over on tags, you can tell exactly what it's going to do. So the example over here is just set to auto tag. So the macros then are used to speed up the process by which we do responses to the end customer. In addition to that, we've got some really nice and sophisticated functionality to actually define how you set up reason codes. So as I said earlier, we can define it against certain brands, and then we've got quite a sophisticated capability to actually define a whole hierarchy. So we can set, for instance, what the source is. We can set all of the different values. We can define, for instance, the incident type. This is completely flexible in terms of what you can do. We can set the service failure, the service failure type. Now, all of this information is then actually used in the cases themselves to, when we're actually doing the closure, we can use all of the information and the configuration to make life very, very easy in the population of those different scenarios. So I'm just going to go into another test scenario over here. And what will happen is when you get to the finalization of the case, all of that information can be captured, and that hierarchy over here is kept within the case itself. It's using our Pro capability, and it allows you to then do very sophisticated analysis of what's actually happening. Similar to that, what we're able to do is we are able to specify the TCF category, and we can keep track of exactly what happened, and we keep track of, for instance, things like write-offs if that's part of your regulated process. The last element I just want to finish off with is some of what Anthony spoke about, and that's really our reporting capability. So built into the inQuba platform is we do have great capabilities to be able to report on all of this activity in terms of keeping track of which cases have been opened, how many of them have been closed, who's closed them, what the performance of the different agents are. This is obviously a multi-user system. And here we can see straight away in terms of over a period of time, so this is quite a long period of time, we have a couple of months, how many cases have been created by a different source, how many have been opened, closed, what's the backlog, and then we can see the performance of the individual agents. And this is very useful when you working in a large environment, when you have many agents and you're trying to get a handle and you're really trying to improve your customer service over a period of time. So that really completes what I want to show you from ensuring an efficiency point of view. We're coming to the top of the hour, and I'm going to finish off there.
Brilliant. Thank you, Trent. I'm just going to take back the screen. I did promise everyone the paper. So the paper, the 5 Best Practices of Service Recovery, is available through the webinar widget. You will see that there's a little section there called Handouts. You can download it directly. Of course, if you have some trouble, please reach out to us, and we'll make sure that you receive that. Right. So in the interest of time, there has been a question that has asked about TCF, but you actually dealt with that in your demo, Trent. So I'm not going to spend any more time on that. The fact that we can support the capturing of TCF outcomes as well as the reporting of that. But here are 1 or 2 questions that I'm going to put forward. Here's a question from Matt. Thanks, Matt. We have a number of ticketing systems in the business, legacy and in-house. Presumably that's developed in-house. Our view of the customer is spread across these. What is the best approach for moving forward?
This is obviously a implementation question that over a period of time comes up quite often, and there's typically a trade-off. I mean, ultimately you want a single platform. That platform potentially could be inQuba, it could be an external ticketing system, and we support all of those scenarios. So often what we'll do with customers is we'll start off with a scenario where we get going with the inQuba platform, and we actually do a very simple integration using email, and literally feed the email from the inQuba system into centralized systems. If there's a more sophisticated requirement, and we've done this for a couple of clients, we can actually do system-to-system API integration. Obviously, that requires quite a lot more development, takes a lot more time. Now, ultimately, it'll give you a better solution, but then you become systems dependent.
Okay, that's great. Let's go for a second and final question. From Lisa. Thanks for this, Lisa. We're a retailer and we honestly receive too high a volume of complaints. We prioritize them manually and probably drop a lot of them. Thanks for being honest. Could the rules that you mentioned, help with this scenario?
So absolutely, and we do that based on segmentation. So I spoke about the concept, I didn't really explain it, of events, but basically that's the context that we get with the customer. So obviously certain customers are more valuable in a business, should I say, and if they fit into a certain segment, it might be a revenue-based segment, you would have to define that for your unique business. We can then set different rules for different segments, and we can prioritize our response to those different scenarios. So obviously what you want to do is based on either the impact of the failure, and obviously, for instance, regulatory complaints, or the value of the customer, typically high value customers. Those customers can then have different rules associated with them so that you prioritize appropriately.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. I think we're going to land it there. Thank you all very much for being with us. We really appreciate you and we appreciate your time. Trent, you want to wrap up for us?
Just to thank everybody for coming today. Obviously, it's a big area that we've covered, and to reinforce the point of why we do this. Ultimately, it's all about offering a better customer experience to customers that unfortunately have experienced a failure in service.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.